Welcome back to the conference. It's a big privilege to be able to moderate this final session of the Corporate Governance Conference. We've had a 3-day journey, plenty of ideas, reflections, new ideas for new paradigms, and we still have a number of questions to be somehow answered. We don't know whether we're going to have the final answer, but I think that it's very good that all of us actually think about the topics that in the previous panel, Rebecca Henderson, Jordi and Jill Fish helped us think about, and they connect very well with what we saw in the first 2 days of the conference. So we have been discussing in this conference whether statements of purpose should be implemented, whether they should be enforced by corporate law or not, whether the debate between shareholder primacy and the stakeholder management paradigm, whether we can find a balance between those two models. We'll also explore in detail the externalities created by our free market economies in terms of the impact on the environment, the impact that we have on the workforce, issues that have to do with inequality, with integration, with inclusiveness, not to speak about the impact of companies from the first world into developing countries. So there are a lot of challenges that we need to somehow take into account while we reinvent and we somehow redefine the new metrics for a more sustainable growth over the next few years. So this is a huge challenge. We have heard very interesting presentations by leading scholars and a few CEOs. But in this final session of the conference, we want to focus more on how companies and more specifically boards of directors can think about it, whether some of the solutions and prescriptions that have been suggested before make sense, whether they can be implemented, whether they are actually the best pathways to make progress in the future. So very interesting issues to be discussed. And for this, we have 3 outstanding individuals who are joining us today for this panel on boards of directors, thinking about corporate purpose and corporate governance. So let me very briefly introduce the 3 of them. First, we have Baroness Denise Kingsmill. Denise is a member of the House of Lords since 2006. She has a distinguished career in law. She was a partner, one of the leading law firms in the UK. And over the past 15 years, she's been a board member of a number of international companies, more recently of Inditex and AIG. So welcome to this panel. Denise, thank you very much for being with us. And we're looking forward to your perspective on these challenges. I want to introduce Juvencio Maeztu to you. Juvencio is the Deputy CEO of Ingka. Ingka, as you know, is the retail arm of IKEA, is the company that makes the IKEA brand operational, buying, producing, selling throughout the world. As you know, IKEA is a very interesting company because it's owned by a foundation and a different type of ownership, different type also of governance, but also the need to deliver performance. Juvencio has been in this position since 2016. Previously, he had a long career at IKEA in a number of positions, including some senior leadership positions in emerging markets, particularly in India, where he was the CEO and helped transform IKEA and the role of IKEA in a large country, complex country as India. So we're looking forward to your reflections on these important challenges, Juvencio. And I also have the pleasure to introduce José Viñals to you. José is the current chairman of Standard & Chartered, one of the leading international financial institutions with a long history of presence in both the Western Europe, but also the Americas and Asia, and other emerging countries, Africa, Latin America. José has a very distinguished career in financial services, in good part of this career in public service. He was, for many years, the deputy governor of the Bank of Spain. He was one of the people leading the European Union into the single currency and the European Central Bank. And before taking up this position at Standard & Chartered, he was the director of financial institutions and capital markets at the International Monetary Fund. Very difficult situation in the years of the 2008 financial crisis. He had to be a real firefighter trying to save the financial system in many parts of the world, trying to keep our economy somehow alive. So we have three very interesting, very experienced board directors and chairman and chief executive officers, and they will help us think about purpose, think about how purpose can improve the quality of corporate governance, and how they see this debate from the perspective of the boardroom, because the boardroom and the role of boards of directors in this debate is absolutely essential. Boards of directors have the final legal responsibility in driving the company long-term, in making some specific choices, and actually acting as, let's put it this way, intermediaries between investors, the top management team and the organization, and also many stakeholders around the organization. So their role is absolutely critical here, and it's very important to understand their concerns, what might work, what will not work, the experience that we have around all those issues. So I would like to ask first each one of the three members of this panel to share with us their views on corporate purpose and how they look at corporate purpose at this time in the development of capitalism around the world. So if I may, Denise, would you mind starting first?
No, not at all. I think I would just like to say, first of all, that I've got a kind of particular perspective on this, because I have one foot, if you like, in the political field and the other foot in a commercial business field. And right at the moment in the UK, certainly, capitalism is failing. I sit on the Economic Affairs Committee of the House of Lords, and we are currently doing an inquiry into COVID employment post-COVID, but actually right in the middle of COVID, and what government policy should be. And the fact is that our somewhat right-wing government is having to carry the load of keeping in employment and subsidizing companies who are absolutely struggling in the COVID crisis. So many companies are failing, and so many companies are really right on the edge. And this is quite interesting given the previous discussions about how fragile sometimes companies' capitalism can be, and how there has to be an underpinning, a strong underpinning of government support. And that does actually play, I think, very much to corporate purpose, because one of the things that seems to be very important is the relationship with the workforce, with the human capital, if you like, that are engaged in a business. It is from them, it is there that the sort of upholding of the corporate purpose really takes place. There's no point in having nice words in your annual report if your employees don't embody the purpose that you hold dear. So those are the two areas that I would think about, is with the third one being the customers. You know, everything has to be customer oriented, customer based, and it's that where you find your purpose. But at the present moment, and I'm surprised that the previous speakers did not mention this at all, because at the moment I think capitalism is undergoing a huge, huge challenge with the pandemic.
Thank you very much, Denise, for your thoughts. Juvencio, would you like to make your thoughts about it explicit for the audience of this conference?
Very good. Hey, as we say hello in Swedish, I do hope you are all safe and you will remain safe in these weird times. I think the basic question to answer, in my opinion, is how can we avoid purpose and business to be a dilemma? And this is, in order to do that, I want to highlight the importance of two things. The importance of being built for purpose. In that area, I want to highlight 5 dimensions that I consider quite fundamental. The entry point is to have a powerful vision, because at the end of the day, purpose cannot be something nice by the side of the business. It has to be integrated in the way you want to run the business. And these 5 dimensions, in my opinion, is the first one is governance and ownership. Ownership, in my opinion, it's important how to use set the long-term dimension. In our case, we are owned by a foundation, Ingka Foundation from Ingvar Kamprad, the founder of IKEA. And then you could say that the resources we make, the majority goes back in as a tax or reinvestment. And in case of dividends, it's used to fund the charitable activities IKEA Foundation. I don't mean that companies should be owned by foundation to have a purpose, but I think it's important to build the long term at the shareholder level. Then the second one is governance. And I don't mean only the practical governance. It's about how can you include decision-making in order to secure the purpose. Because at the end of the day, in big companies, it's thousands of leaders taking decisions every day. And it's this decision that will help you to be closer or not to the purpose. Then the third dimension is about values. I do consider values as the blood in the system. In our case, out of the 8 values, we have 2 nice values that merge beautifully together. One is cost consciousness, that's driving affordability, but also care for the people and the planet, that's driving also sustainability. And it's about how can you limit your resources to deliver greater impact. Then the 4th one is leadership. And leadership, I do consider that recruitment is the most strategic decisions that companies can make and the board of directors have to make. Because at the end of the day, it's the beginning at the end of everything. And within leadership, it's also the way you measure performance. In our case, we measure performance based on 4 dimensions. Value, creating value for company, creating value for consumers, creating value for people, but also creating value for the planet. And it's the 4 that are fundamental. We cannot call good performance if you don't create value for the 4 of them. And finally, the 5th dimension is financial resilience. Because to build financial resilience is a precondition to create sustainability. In our case, we have clear rules about self-financing, minimum liquidity, making money before you spend. And this is important not to be in denial with this. Otherwise, you end up in a dilemma. So at the end of the day, it's a vision, in our case, to create a better life for the many people, but it's also about the ownership, the governance, the values, the leadership, and the financial resilience that are the preconditions to be built for purpose.
Thank you very much, Juvencio. It's a wonderful synthesis of your thoughts and experience. And I would like to ask José. José, you are the chairman of one of the largest financial institutions in the world. How do you see this debate on purpose from the perspective of a large bank such as Standard & Chartered?
Well, thank you very much, Jordi, and thanks very much for having me in this amazing conference. Banks are always a subject of debate, and certainly banks in the world of finance got a bad name because of the last financial crisis, and I think that it is now time to change that situation. To me, when we talk about purpose, we're talking about something which is existential. To me, purpose is all about making organizations more human, in the sense of organizations doing things which are aligned with the long-term goals of humanity. So I think we need to introduce the H word here, squarely when we talk about purpose. I mean, organizations, companies have a purpose, like individuals have a purpose. Why are we here? What makes makes a tick? Why do we have a social license to operate as a company? What is it that we're going to do in order to make the world a little bit better? How are we going to make our money and do that at the same time? I think that is something which is critical. I think that, of course, there are two types of purpose. There is the nominal purpose, and then there is the real purpose. There are many companies that, because of PR, have adopted apparent purposes, nominal purposes, but they're not authentic, they're not meaningful, they're not real, they're not worth the paper they're written on. And then there is the real purpose, the authentic purpose, what really defines the soul of the organization. And this is something which is critical both internally and externally. It is critical internally because you want to make sure that everybody in the organization understands where you're going and how you're going to get there. I think that having enough clarity on what you want to achieve and how you're going to get there is absolutely fundamental for your employees, but it's also fundamental for your investors, the people who have to put the money on you. They need to know. So the issues about data and metrics become very important when you want to go beyond financial performance and talk about non-financial performance. Now, should non-financial performance and financial performance be at odds with each other? I don't think that's necessarily the case. There may be some instances, but in terms of my experience, I can tell you that in most cases, what you had to do in order to align with your purpose, it's something that over time also delivered the better performance. So I think that that's something that when you have the right governance, when you have the right purpose, when you have the right culture in the organization emanating from this purpose, and the decisions making be guided in the right way, most of the time you achieve win-win situations. So I think that we should not overestimate the trade-offs because there are many more synergies and complementarities that can be exploited. So the bottom line, as was mentioned in the previous fascinating discussion with Rebecca and Jordi, the bottom line needs not be at odds with you doing things which are in the ultimate good interests of society, and you should aim at doing everything with these two objectives, profitability and the long-term interest society, aligned, and most of the time they are.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jose, for these thoughtful comments on how you look at purpose and corporate governance. Let me make a remark here, which is that over the past 2 days and the past sessions, we've seen a lot of debate on the convenience and the opportunity to adopt explicitly a statement of purpose. As you remember, some of the speakers were clearly in support of this. Some other speakers don't think that this is the right pathway. But I think that from this discussion today, in the first round of interventions by the 3 guests in this panel, I think that all of them agree that purpose is very important for the management of the company. It's very important for the eventually also the governance of the company. And the issue here is how we are able to unpack and to unbundle purpose into things, into elements and dimensions that make sense for a specific company at a specific moment in its history. So I think that this is very, very important. In this perspective, I would like to ask Denise about the dimensions of purpose that are being highlighted today by investors, by capital markets, and also by companies reporting on how they do on those issues, on the environmental, social, and governance issues, the ESG factors. Denise, you have a long experience with companies dealing with environmental issues. You also have a long experience in dealing professionally and also with companies that have to take into account those social dimensions. How would you look at those dimensions of purpose, the environmental impact, the social dimensions? How would you look when you sit on a board in a board meeting, discussing some specific strategic decisions, how you bring this conversation into the strategy of the company whose long-term orientation is being debated by the board of directors.
Yes, that's very interesting. My most recent experience has been with startups, and it's quite interesting. You know, I was the founding chair of a online banking, Monzo, which is very successful in the UK and is spreading into the United States at the moment. And we sat around my kitchen table and we worked out why we were doing this. You know, why were we setting up a bank? Why a bank? You know, and the reason was that, you know, the old-fashioned idea that we wanted to make a better mousetrap. We wanted to make banks better. We wanted to help people with, you know, we thought that we could make the best bank going, the best service to our customers. Gradually over time, that seemed to be our purpose, and we got together and we got the money together and we developed and created a relatively large bank, 4 million customers in a very short period of time. But as we developed, we began to see that our corporate purpose was developing too. And that instead of thinking that we wanted to make a better mousetrap, we wanted to make a better account, if you like, it developed into the point where we wanted to help people manage their money better, to make money work for them, really. And particularly people who didn't have very much money, you know, to enable them to be, and that's what I thought is quite interesting. It was the development of the board, of us as a board, the founding board, if you like, the way in which it developed as we went along, as we saw what our customers required, as we began ourselves to become more aware of what our purpose was. It grew and it developed. And that contrasts in a way with with companies that are long established, where, you know, it is actually the founders that started it. I mean, in IAG in 1963, Mr. Ortega established the most amazing company, and it's grown and it's developed, but at the same time, it still holds true to the essence of well-made, well-designed garments at an affordable price for the people. And that continues to be very much what it's hung around with the most amazing systems and methods, and it has 8,000 stores across the world. So it's long way since the 1963 days. But I see similarities between the way in which we developed our corporate purpose as a startup bank with the way a very large company also holds true to its original purpose. And that is something which in the boardroom is very, very apparent. And that's what everybody accepts it and knows it and understands it.
Thank you, Denise. José, when you are chairing the board of a large, complex institution, Standard & Chartered, you get you speak with your CEO, you speak with the CFO, the members of your top management team, and you know they come to you. How do you make sure that what you say around the purpose and the long-term orientation of the bank is actually taken into account by your team? Your team has a pressure to perform, has a pressure to deliver, has a pressure to reach some financial and non-financial goals. How does a chair lead the process so that the outcome is profits, but also purpose?
I'll answer you with 2 examples. One regarding our purpose. And our purpose, you know, an organization which sits across more than 60 markets in the world, many emerging markets and developing economies, which comprise 2/3 of the global population. We all know why we exist, and we exist to improve the lives of the people in those countries, which should be improved because they don't have the standards of living that people have in advanced economies. And that's an extraordinarily powerful driver of everything we do. I think it's very important that you have the right individuals in the organization. Purpose is a necessary condition, but it needs to be translated. It needs to be translated into a strategy. That strategy is proposed by the executives and needs to be validated by the board, but executives need to be of the right kind. You have to get the right people in the leadership of the bank and throughout the bank, because you need to have the right purpose implemented by the right people throughout. So the conversations are made easier by the fact that there is a lot of symphony. One example I wanted to mention is, we made a decision in 2018 to discontinue new coal financing. In emerging markets and developing economies, they have tremendous need to grow, and sources of energy are in many places still brown sources of energy. So we had to make the decision about discontinuing the financing of coal. We knew that that would lead to some reduction in our revenues, that there would be also some political issues. But what we did is, okay, we're going to discontinue the financing of coal, but we're going to put at the disposal of the markets in which we are exiting the coal financing, additional important financing available for clean and renewable sources of energy. And fast forward 2 years from that, what we have seen is that our revenues have not been reduced, that transition has happened actually quite nicely, and that the business is now on a much better place vis-a-vis our ESG. And in fact, one of the key objectives of Standard Chartered is to make sure that the financing which is needed in emerging markets and developing economies, beyond things like climate change, to comply with sustainable development goals, is there. And we help bring money from where it sits in the largest financial centers, London, New York, Hong Kong, and Singapore, into these markets. And in Africa, for example, you only have 10% of what you need in terms of financing to cover the sustainable development goals. So there is 90% needed. And in emerging markets and developing economies, you need 60% of financing. So we help that. That is something which is also very powerful. And I can tell you that I haven't yet been in a situation, other than the one on coal, which we resolved well, where we have had a conflict between what we thought was good for revenue and what we thought was good for our social purpose and corporate purpose.
Thank you, José. Juvencio, if I may, the position of the CEO of a large company is a complex one. You need to deal with the board on the one hand. In your case, a supervisory board. You also need to deal with your top management team. And also you need to make sure that the organization actually delivers what it has promised to deliver. When you discuss strategic issues, investment decisions, entry into new markets with your colleagues, Juvencio, how do you make sure that purpose is there? And in the case of IKEA, you've had somehow the privilege of a founder who had a very clear view of the future and a very clear sense of mission and purpose. How do you make that purpose is there and that it becomes a driver of growth for a company such as IKEA and Ingka?
I would answer in a couple of ways. The first one is securing that values is a living reality, and we are strong in values. And I think this is important because values is not only an inspiration, it's also a guiding star when you face dilemmas. So when you don't have a map, you need a compass. And then when you cannot know where you go, at least you have a compass which is guiding your decision. And this is for me values. The second one, it's about being obsessed in integrating sustainability inside the business model. Otherwise, you will be putting more dilemmas to everyone. And in order to do that, we start with our vision, because our vision is a better life for the many people. So it's about offering solutions at affordable price for the many people, for their home. But the planet is not a place, it's also the home where we live. So you have to combine both. And in order to secure the integration, it's about win-win-win approach. Sustainability has to be a good business. So it cannot be by the side. And we do that in 3 ways. The first one is being clear in the range that we offer, that the materials by 2030, 100% will be made from renewable or recycled. We are today at 60% in renewable materials. The second one is about the operations. Today we produce more energy than we consume, and is produced by renewable, by sun or wind. But also it's about EV in 5 years from now, 100%. But the third one is about people, where by next year, there will not be a pay gap in between men and women. Today, we have 50% men and women, but also the whole diversity and inclusion. This is the material, and sustainability has to be inside the business, not by the side. The second dimension that I would like to say is not only about sustainable production, it's also about responsible consumption. And then here is about creating awareness with the consumers. We are committed that more than 1 billion people have to live within the limit of the planet in our reach. And then it's about providing solutions. People don't go to say, I don't know anyone who wants to destroy the planet. It's that they don't know how to. So you have to provide solutions. And finally, it has to be affordable, because sustainability cannot be a luxury by the few. It will never fly. It has to be affordable. And this is the responsibility we have, companies like us, to secure. And I am happy to say that in last year, we grew by 6.5%, and we reduced our global footprint by 4.3%. So it's about decoupling growth and footprint. So I think these two, values and integration of the business, is fundamental.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Juvencio. I would like to encourage the participants in this conference to keep sending me questions. I have already a number of them, but I'm going to introduce some of your questions into this conversation with our 3 distinguished speakers. There is a question here for you, Denise, that I think is really, really relevant. In the case of listed companies, where you have to be accountable, all companies have to be accountable. Listed companies have some legal requirements in terms of accountability. In your experience as a board member, which pressure is the biggest pressure that you feel in the boardroom? Is it the one coming internally from the notion of purpose or some social driven type of goals? Or it's more capital markets and investors, especially at this time, when many of them or some of them are actually requiring listed companies a higher level of transparency and accountability in terms of ESG factors? What's your observation here?
Well, I've been the chair of just about every committee on the various boards that I've sat on over the last 20 years. I've been the chair of the various committees. And so the pressures are different depending on the committee that you're on. I mean, when you're the worst one, I think, is being chair of the remuneration committee, where you're subject to do all sorts of, questioning and pressure. And there, very much the performance of the company is paramount because of the incentives that are being provided for the executives. Increasingly, there are non-financial requirements that have come about, but still, I think in the majority of cases, the financial pressure, the financial questions are the greatest. To me, it isn't so much from the investors that the pressure to do the right thing, and that's what I want to emphasize: to do the right thing. That comes much more from the culture of the company concerned. Some companies have that culture and some don't. Some hold their values and their purpose right in the forefront of everything that they do. And some do not do that. The pressure does not, in my experience, come very much from the investors. Increasingly that it is. One thing I would just like to say about the investor community, I think what would be very good if there was more transparency as to who the investors actually are, so that you knew who your investors were, because so often the shares are held in sort of vague entities which do not necessarily have a clear identity. The other thing too that I would ask is that pension funds also exercise more responsibility in relation to these purposes, these general purposes. I think I'm very lucky, I feel at the moment, that the companies on whose boards I sit presently have a highly developed sense of purpose, and one which they live and breathe every single day throughout. But there are many companies for whom it is, as we say, as an add-on. And I do think that there could be more pressure from, in particular, from pension funds, and also more transparency as to who exactly are the shareholders of a company.
Thank you, Denise. Juvencio, there is a question that perhaps you may address here, which is on greenwashing, and the idea that sometimes purpose or some statements of mission by some companies may be just a PR exercise. As a matter of fact, as you may remember, when we had the Business Roundtable statement in August 2019, one of the criticisms against that statement was that those CEOs were somehow developing a very sophisticated exercise of PR, and even some criticisms went even further by saying that they were trying to prevent some additional regulatory pressure coming from the US government. So the question, Juvencio, is how do you walk the talk? How do you make sure that what the board and the top management team says about the purpose of the company, how you make sure that that trickles down, that is really something authentic, felt by most employees? And what's your experience at IKEA and Ingka about it?
Very good. I think it's a super valid question, Jordi. I think the next 10 years is about acting and not about talking. And then in that process, I think the most important thing for companies is to show proof points that you are actually moving. That's what I believe, that reporting is not only built on transparency, it's also built on progress. You have to show, nobody will attack you if you're not perfect, but people will attack you if you are not transparent or you don't show progress. So for me, the important thing is to have a plan, to monitor the plan, to have a solid verification system, to use, to quantify the proof points and to move in that way. I think this is extremely important, the proof points and the carriers of the message. This is one dimension. The second dimension is, as I said before, to integrate inside the business model. It's not about talking. If I take an example, we launched LED. At that time was €7, and we said it has to be affordable. Today, everything is LED in our range, and it's €1. It's not €7 any longer. Or not the meatball. We launched the plant ball, where this based on is plant ball protein. Is 96% less of the footprint, but at the same time it's affordable and tastes fantastic. So it is the proof point and the carriers what matters a lot in this process. And at the end of the day, I think it's about recruiting the right people, because this will never happen if you don't have thousands of leaders who are really engaged. And the best, I normally say that the best speaker of the corporate strategy is not corporate communication, it's coworker. And this is the best proof point that you can have.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Juvencio. There is a question here for José. There is a person in the audience who emphasizes the fact that, that we have lots of tools in the world of finance and corporate finance to be able to assess the impact of certain decisions on profitability, on financial performance. How do we make sure that the metrics for non-financial performance, and specifically for ESG factors, get more standardized, get better understood by everybody, and how this change in the way companies report can actually happen and make this pathway to deep up corporate purpose more feasible?
That's a great question also, because here you need to be really transparent. I think it's very important that you have goals regarding ESG. We're talking about ESG a lot, but I want to introduce the dimension of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, because I think that in a way they make more precise in many dimensions what we mean by the ESG. And the question is one of data, metrics, and disclosure. And presently, I must confess that this is a terrible alphabet soup. There are a number of initiatives from the private sector for the public sector. And one of the most important things that need to be done is to reach an agreement around some common standards that allow reporting in a transparent and consistent manner so that companies can demonstrate how they're moving towards meeting their goals in terms of sustainability, for example, but at the same, and investors can also measure that. So I think that this is something which is certainly work in progress. One very important thing for companies is to be very clear about what they want to do. For example, in our case, we have put out our position statements that state very clearly what are our red lines and what are our targets regarding a number of fronts on sustainability. We also try to be as transparent as we can, not only in terms of the annual report, but also publishing every year a sustainability summary, which explains what it is that we have done across the different sustainable development goals in order to progress towards meeting our commitment. And I think that's a very important point that Juvencio was making before. The direction of travel is extremely important. It's as important as the end point is the direction of travel. And then I think that you have to measure impact. And impact is very important. And we're trying to do that also, given the available data, so that we can see how the actions we're taking in terms of our lending are affecting environment, are affecting the economy, and are affecting society. And we publish those. And the latest one that we published a few months ago was on Ghana, one country in Africa, one of the 15 countries in Africa in which we are based. We wanted to understand what was the impact that we were making. So I think all of those things are extremely important that companies do. But I think we have a need also for common standards. And in some domains, there are already some standards. There is a task force on climate-related financial disclosures, which has done a lot to promote the cause of that particular aspect by financial companies. This needs to spread to non-financial companies, and we need to cover a broader ground in terms of sustainability, because that's the way to measure progress and to catch those who are cheating. And that's very important. You need to have some measurable standards in order to make sure that, as we were saying before, companies not only talk the talk, but walk the talk. And for that, you need information that can be monitored, assessed, and then on the basis of that, decisions to exit those who are not complying be made by responsible investors.
Thank you, José. You know that there is a debate, and we had this debate here in this conference, on whether regulations should step in and corporate law in different jurisdictions should take into account corporate purpose in a much more specific way. So I have here a couple of questions that actually bring this issue in different perspectives. And I would like to ask both Denise and José, both of you have many years of experience in public policy, and you both have an expertise in regulation as well. What do you think about regulating corporate law and trying to introduce a statement of purpose in a much more clear way in the codes of corporate governance and corporate laws in major jurisdictions? Would you like to address this first, Denise?
I obviously, as a lawyer and a former regulator, I think you can predict what my answer is going to be. Yes, I do. I have pushed very hard for a public interest test for in many areas of regulation, that it should not just simply be black line law. There should be a public interest test. And by public interest, I mean the very issues that we're talking about in terms of corporate purpose, in terms of sustainability, in terms of the environment, in terms of human capital, in terms of customers. There should, so I personally am very strongly in favor of it. It's one of the issues that I think it would be good to explore sometime, is the role of government in these issues as well.
Thank you. José, any specific reflection on this?
Well, interestingly, also having spent many years in the public domain, I have a slightly different view, which is the following. I believe that purpose is something that needs to come endogenously in companies, rather than being exogenously imposed. Now, having said that, I think that public policy can help very much how companies carry out their purpose. For example, the conversation we were having a few minutes ago about the need for common reporting standards on environmental, social and governance matters. I think that this is something which is very important, and international regulators would set the standards that allow companies to report on these common consistent standards. That would be one way of moving in this direction. We want also a regulation to set certain societal expectations, and perhaps rather than regulating the purpose of an organization, I would prefer regulators to take very seriously their supervisory analysis of how companies are exercising the governance and whether the governance is working. And one thing that happens in the UK, but it's also increasingly happening in the European Union, is external board effectiveness reviews conducted by regulators. And those can be very meaningful because they can point to where your governance is not exactly doing the things that you're supposed to be doing if you want to be in line with your purpose, culture, and the values that come from it. So I think that indirect approach, I think, can be very helpful. So I think that there is a need for a combination. It needs to be, purpose needs to be endogenously generated by companies. Those who don't have a good purpose or just have a fake purpose, I think would be found out and punished eventually. May not be over the short term, but eventually will. But I think also that public policy can do something in terms of having improved the design and make sure that firms are incentivized through the supervisory process in order to really take seriously the purpose that they have established and make sure that the governance is consistent with that.
Thank you. Thank you both, Denise and José. This is a very tricky issue, and I think that you have complementary perspectives. Both agree on the importance of purpose, both agree that regulators can have a role here. Perhaps it's the level of intensity, and we'll leave the question open perhaps for additional comments. There are a couple of questions here for Juvencio, if I may. One of them says that IKEA has an incredible tradition of being consumer friendly and also being very much environmental friendly. At the same time, one of the questions says IKEA tries to sell as many goods as possible. How the trade-off between selling more and growing the business with the impact on the environment combines with the concern for the environment itself. Any reflections on this, Juvencio?
Yeah, very good. And I think the entry point is that it can never be a dilemma, because if it is a dilemma, you end up in the wrong corner. That's what they said. Instead of having a dilemma, it is both and, it's not or. How do we do this? I think the point is that we are determined and committed, and we have a lot of proof points to make a sustainable production. The good thing of IKEA as a brand is that we are a production-oriented retail brand. So we can influence upstream the whole value chain. And this is, with that power comes the responsibility. That's what I said before. It is in the having by all the renewable material or recycled material, and by being climate positive in the operation, that you have to do that. And you know what? It's a good business. So for example, all our Better Cotton initiative, we were founding together with WWF, the Better Cotton initiative, then is selling much more than a normal product. Or the plant board that I said before, or the home solar that we have launched, and a customer can save more than 400 euros a year. So what I try to say is every step you make, it creates good business. And it's by doing that that you close the loop. And the important thing of that, at the end of the day, is that it's not a dilemma in between sustainability or economy. It's about a sustainable development, because societies has to develop. There are many homes in the world that are lacking the basic needs. So we have many times a too much European-centric view of the world, but we have a big responsibility to do that. So it is the integration and the proof point that give us a lot of energy. And when you talk this with the leaders, say, yeah, but if I do this, will I sell less? No, you will sell more. And it's a good business to be good business.
Thank you. Juvencio, if I may, around your comment, I think it reminds me of a well-known article by Professor Michael Porter a few years ago on the importance. At that time, he mentioned the importance of regulation on environmental issues. And it's very interesting, by observing a number of countries, a number of industries, how by raising somehow the bar in terms of environmental impact goals, companies can actually become much more innovative, can develop better business models, and eventually have both better performance and also a much cleaner impact on the environment. So I think that your point, Juvencio, is very interesting for the audience here with many senior executives and investors. I think that companies can actually develop new business models and can develop management innovation in a way to foster both financial goals, but also ESG goals that could be really sustainable for both people and planet. There is here a set of questions around the issue of culture and values. It's something that some of you have already referred to earlier in this debate, but I would like to ask Denise. Denise, you've been leading some commissions in the UK around corporate culture and the importance of corporate culture and corporate governance, about human capital and the development of human capital. And also you have been dealing in your professional life also with issues, with social issues that are truly important. How do you see the role of the board of directors somehow shaping or helping nurture the good culture of the firm? How do you see the role of the board in this area?
They have to familiarize themselves very much with what's going on the shop floor, if you like, what's going on in the factory, what's going on. You can't just sit in the boardroom. You won't get the sense of what the culture is simply from sitting around the boardroom table. You have to be present at in various different places. You have to go there, you have to visit. I've done so many, I've been through flour mills and electricity generating machines, generating plants. I've just visited so many factories, so many different environments, because that's the way you actually figure out what's really happening in an organization. Because people can talk the talk, as we've said before, but until you as a director have actually walked the walk and talked to the people on the shop floor, talk to the people in the shops, talk to the people in the hotels, talk to them in the restaurants, till you know what it's really like and what they believe to be the purpose and the corporate and the corporate culture. In the boardroom, you won't get enough of a picture. So it's really important to get your hands dirty, if you like, and really get into the business of the business.
Thank you, Denise. José, you have an experience, recent experience at your bank of trying to, in the middle of a transformation process in the bank, also trying to nourish or somehow reboot some of the values and elements of the culture of the bank. Any reflections on how corporate culture can help make better governance decisions and eventually also management decisions?
Yes, culture is absolutely critical. Let me just link culture back to purpose. We had a few years ago an enterprise-wide process in order to rethink our purpose and redefine our purpose, given that the world was changing and we were changing with the world. And that was an exercise which was bottom-up and also top-down, meaning that the whole organization was consulted. We had a survey. We took stock of what people were saying, but at the same time, there was an input from the board, and we had quite a bit of conversations with the executives based on the views from the staff, and then we put things together in terms of a purpose statement, which I want to highlight two words. One is prosperity, banking for better lives. That would be the translation of prosperity for our clients and for our communities, and doing that through our unique diversity of an organization where we have banks in 60 countries and where we have more of 120 nationalities, many services, many products, many things. Diversity is quite unique, and we put this diversity and inclusion at the service of the prosperity of our clients in our communities. That, of course, helped us have a big drive inside the organization to relaunch our culture and make sure that that culture was associated with three key valued behaviors. The first of which is always do the right thing. And I like to say to our people, doing the right thing means doing the right thing always and everywhere, even when no one is watching. That's what we want you to do. And do that also thinking client, thinking communities. So let's earn our money the right way. That culture is supervised, overseen by the board. We have our governance practices where we have a committee which is specifically been established to oversee the cultural conduct matters. And of course, culture is something that is always in the air of the boardroom where we discuss anything, because everything needs to be consistent with our culture. So we make sure that the culture, which is consistent with the purpose, and the value behaviors which come from that culture form part of the DNA of every single person in the organization.
Thank you, José. Well, time goes very fast, and we're finishing this session. But I would like to ask each one of the three distinguished speakers in this panel to perhaps share with us some final reflections on purpose. And if I may, perhaps I would like to ask each one of you if you would like to advise other senior executives, perhaps institutional investors attending this conference, on how to think about purpose. Could you share with them, could you share with us perhaps the final thought that you would like to leave us with in this session? Perhaps we can start with Juvencio. Juvencio, may I ask you about it?
Yeah, I think the biggest highlight takeaway for me is that purpose can never be a nice statement written in the walls of the company. It is the deep understanding of the purpose, and it's the decision-making connected with the purpose that make purpose a reality. And I can hardly agree more with José that culture and values is the right guiding star, because we experienced that during the COVID. We didn't have a map to navigate the crisis, but we had a strong compass. And this the strong compass, values and purpose is the same thing, is the comfort zone to take decisions in any company.
Thank you, Juvencio. Denise, may I ask you a final thought about it?
The two things that I would say is that a company needs as part of their purpose is sustainability, looking to the long term, looking to those issues which are going to really make a good and sustainable business. And it has to have a moral element to it as well, because we are dealing with people, we employ people, we serve people. People are important, and therefore there has to be a moral element to it. And the other element that I alluded to right at the beginning is resilience. In these days, we don't know where the next shock is coming from, whether it is a political shock, a populist shock, a terrorist shock, a virus shock. You have to develop in a company resilience. So I would say sustainability and resilience are the two things that we need to focus on.
Thank you, Denise. José, some final reflections on this?
Well, linking with the previous session, I think that business has a great opportunity now, working alongside with governments and the rest of civil society to redefine what kind of new social contract we want for an economy and society, which, as Denise was mentioning, is more sustainable, is more inclusive, is more resilient, and therefore it's better for every single citizen. And I think that's very important. I think purpose is key. And I want to go back to what I said at the beginning. Let's through purpose, make organizations more human. Purpose is the true soul of the organization, is what makes everything emanate from there. Let's make sure we have our soul on the right place. And for investors, I would ask for three things. First, be very demanding in asking companies to demonstrate how we're moving the needle, how we're making progress, how we are walking the talk. Second, think long-term, please. Short-term will take us nowhere. Institutional investors are better, others are less good, but please think long-term. Otherwise, the private sector would not have the incentives will align. And third, put your money where your mouth is. If you really think that ESG or SDG is the right answer, vote with your shares. Exit companies that you don't want to be in, and then use your power in the annual general meetings to make sure the companies go where you think they need to go. That's what I think is responsible investing, and they can make a huge difference.
Yeah, totally agree.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, José, Denise, Juvencio. It's been a fantastic session with lots of insights coming from your perspective. And I would like to highlight, if I may, a couple of them, which I think for me resonate in a very special way. The first is that we cannot speak about purpose without speaking about the culture of the place, the soul of the company, the values of the individual. So important, because at the end, its purpose actually gets somehow implemented through the actions, the decisions of many individuals. And this is really, really important. We need to make these connections, I think, in a very direct way. Otherwise, we may speak about purpose and then life goes in a completely different way. And the second idea, which I think has been highlighted as well, you're coming from different companies, different industries, the need to integrate purpose into corporate strategy, into organizational design, the business model, the hiring system, the nominating system, the compensation system, reporting, and then as Denise and José have highlighted in these final observations, the need to work trying to solve also a collective action problem that was described in the previous session, which is that companies need to work with governments, need to work with investors, need to work to make our system a sustainable system for all, not just for a few privileged, but for all. And this is actually something that requires new metrics, new ways of reporting, and also an education of investors that goes beyond some short-term performance. So it's a very complex issue. It's a big challenge, but we are here to try to give some answers to this challenge. And I want to congratulate Denise, José, and Juvencio for the outstanding work that they are doing in the organizations, and also for the clarity and the good judgment and the personal integrity that they bring to this debate. So it's been a most insightful session. Thank you very much for your contribution to this session. And we need to stop the session here. We're going to move in a few seconds to the wrap up of the conference. So Denise, José, Juvencio, thank you very much. We cannot give you a warm applause, but thumbs up for each one of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye.